Okay, hello.
Uh, hey,
Hey, what's up, man?
good. Well, thank you for coming on again.
Okay, I just want to make sure everybody can hear and everything's clear. Can we just hear something from your mic one more time?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you? Great.
Okay. So just before starting, I just want to say I think you're one of the most brilliant investors in the world, and I think that the fact that you let everyone see your plan of work is amazing. But I also think that no matter how the quantum thing goes, you'll be successful because the way you
Okay,
work
okay, okay. Just stop.
is.
I just want to stop right there. Like, we're not here to talk about, you know, what like my career is or isn't or is going to look like or isn't. Like, I don't
No,
need.
because I don't want to
I
take
don't
it
need. I
personal.
don't need the
I think
patron. I
I
don't need
th-
to be patronized. I don't know who you are. I'm not going to go through your credentials and vice
you can think that I'm an idiot. It's okay, but I'm just
and
saying
vice
you're
versa.
amazing,
Like, you're not.
and
I
you.
appreciate the compliments, but I also don't want to hear what's going to happen to me or like let's
Do
just
you
get
understand that you're different than other people? That's what I'm saying.
let's get to the point. We're here to talk
No,
about
but do you understand that when
we're
you
here to
enter
talk
a
about
position that's
quantum.
totally different than anyone else?
We're here to talk about quantum.
Sure, but do you understand this?
Understand what? You're not explaining
You are a
what you're
great
talking about.
investor, and when you go into a position, you will, even if you lose by a lot, you will recuperate, you will
No, we're
learn, you
not
will
here to talk about
succeed.
that. We're not here to talk
Is
about
that, do
that.
you, but do you understand this?
It's not relevant. We're here to
Of
talk
course,
about.
it's relevant
No,
because
it's
the way you
not.
think is different,
We're here to
and the
talk
way
about
you build
quantum.
your trades is different.
We're here to talk about quantum technology. That's it.
Okay, okay,
Okay. So I guess you're a bull. Is that right?
yes,
Okay. And I'm a bear. And
yes.
I guess maybe you can start by explaining why you're a bull, where you think this industry is going to go.
Okay, so there are levels to my bull thesis. The like you can look at the companies trying to do work right now. IonQ, Rigetti, QBTS. That's one level of application right now. And then there's the level of, is quantum computing even going to be successful, or quantum annealing? Is it going to be successful? That's another level. And I think another level above this is, how are scientific fields advancing right now? And I think that because of AI, every researcher, every scientist, every programmer has in his hands the strongest tool ever, pretty much, that's only getting better to test his ideas and his dreams. And some way or another, when you have such a powerful tool in the hands of people, you make all the hardest problem accessible to more and more people. Somewhere there's going to be a breakthrough. I don't think a breakthrough takes another 20 years or 25 years, because Nvidia already did a breakthrough, and you can't have a breakthrough unless you get all the other subsequent breakthroughs near. So I think that from the level of AI, there was a breakthrough. There's going to be a breakthrough in quantum computing and quantum annealing. And then we can argue, is D-Wave doing this, or is Rigetti doing that, or is IonQ doing that, or Quantinuum, or all the other companies. I don't, the specific companies, I don't really care. I just look at the fundamentals of where people work, where AI works. And that's my thesis. Okay.
Okay, there's just an echo, so I'm going to make sure that when you talk, you say your thing, and then when I talk, I say my thing, and we just go back and forth. Because otherwise, if we talk at the same time, we're going to get an echo problem. So I'm not going to
Okay,
interrupt you.
sure. Sorry.
No, 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 it's fine. I'm not going to talk while you talk, and hope you do the same. Because if you do, we get a lot of feedback. Anyway, okay. So I see what you're saying.
Why is someone calling me Jewish
you're doing it
on
as
the
we
chat?
speak. Like,
It's
literally, we
insane.
have to take turns. Okay,
No,
we
but
have
why
to
is
take
someone
turns.
telling me on chat about Jewish? That's insane right now. That shouldn't happen. Okay?
Listen. I can't control what people write or don't write. I can on Godel. I can ban somebody on Godel if they're anti-Semitic. I can't do that on YouTube. We have mods. Any mods, feel free to do that. I can't moderate the YouTube while we talk, but I
That's okay.
strongly condemn anti-Semitism and in any form. The Jewish people are friends of are my friend. Um, I support Israel. I think I made that clear. So I have no personal thing here, but
No, it's not. It's just that I hate when people take
it
it to
is
their
what it is. I
faces.
mean, don't worry about some random idiot. I mean, what's the IQ of that idiot? Who cares? What some idiot thinks. Okay, so let's go back to quantum. Um, and like I said, I have to. The way it's probably going to work is I talk for a minute and then you talk for a minute. We just kind of keep going back and forth. So, okay, so AI is going to create some scientific breakthroughs. There are some questions about that. I am very bullish on AI. I mentioned my family connections to AI, so I'm also in that category. I spent a good chunk of the weekend working on this kind of thing, this exact kind of thing, trying to find curve isogenies in elliptic curve cryptography to attempt to make it faster. And I think Scott Aronson just gave a talk at Harvard that said the next like busy beaver proof. That's something he's really interested in is busy beaver, which is a mathematical thing. The next big busy beaver proof is going to be, as he said, from our friends in AI, quote unquote. So I'm sort of on board that AI is good and AI is going to make science go faster and things like that. There are a lot of questions about how much faster is every part of science going to be made faster, is how fast for each different part, et cetera. Could there be some parts that are immune to AI, so to speak? What is the ceiling of AI? These are all pretty important questions. But I think that uh, the bigger question here is, what are we driving towards? You know, what is the point for quantum? Where is quantum going? Why does if the AI breakthroughs, that whether it's the human mind that makes those breakthroughs for quantum, or it's the computer assisted human mind that makes those breakthroughs, or just the computer mind that makes those breakthroughs? I think the question is, where are we going? So Chris Monroe is one of the human minds, right? He made the first ion trap. He made the first logical qubit. He started IonQ, brilliant guy. He said quantum's a really long way away. Um, you know, but the question I have for you is, what gets you excited specifically about quantum? Not just that we're going to have breakthroughs, but what kind of breakthroughs, which will yield what kind of applications. And I'll go on mute now.
Yeah, okay. First of all, I think it's very smart of you to go to Chris Monroe and to main people in the industry and hearing their interviews. I'm not doing it enough because I'm mostly focused on papers and patents, but I watch what you do and it's amazing. Uh, I I don't think that people. It's very hard to understand the size of influence these tools have. I don't know if there's any one person who can visualize everything that's going on. That's why I prefer look at the papers and see the it's just insane amount of papers and ideas of researchers. I just think that you have I forgot its name, convergence of many sciences happening right now. I'm sure you know the problem of P versus NP because you also talk about Scott Anderson. Um, and he's one of the leading expert in this. I think I got his name wrong, but he's one of the leading researchers in this. And the thing is that problems have patterns that return. So if you build a bridge between problems, if you see that one problem can be reduce to another problem, you actually get a bridge between different scientific um, realms, and so the different toolboxes can be shared between them. So when you talk about quantum, that's a step below this, because I'm just looking at how people are interacting right now. They can take ideas for chemistry, from biology, from physics. We still have the luxury of living in a world where we can, circle a place and say this is chemistry, circle another place and this is biology. I don't think that's going to last that long. I think the models, they look at patterns and they see underlying structure, and they don't care about other things. And so you're going to get more bridges between things, and I don't think people can understand these bridges right now. And the more you get the bridges, the more advanced you're going to get. And I think that what this advancements will also happen in quantum. And so that's why what I'm excited about. That's why I also told you about nuclear energy and about stuff. Now, why specifically? Now, why do I think the nuclear energy and quantum is different than weed or the genome or stuff like that? Because AI has a problem. It either it needs a lot of energy. So there are two options for it to evolve. One is to get the nuclear energy route. Okay, we need supply chains and stuff like that. We need to get these things going. Russia has the biggest provider of high grade uranium, that's 10x. The largest mines are in Kazakhstan. So we're going to need supply chains for that. But companies might say, listen, I don't, with all the politics going, I don't want to be dependent on all these sides. Let's try and attack the um, computational model. Let's try new algorithms, and that's why I think they're like, okay, let's throw $100 million at quantum. Let's see what happens there. So actually, AI needs quantum because nuclear is not always available for it. So that's why I look at the growth for quantum. AI needs it. It needs to be better, and it's going to do everything it can to be better. And I think it'll succeed. That's
Okay, cool. Okay, so I'm gonna respond to some of this. So the AI needs quantum. We have to talk about, because I very very much disagree, and I'm gonna try not to make some kind of call to authority, but we can go into this in a little bit. But in terms of scientific overlaps and laterals, I mean, obviously, there's this idea of like the Langlands conjecture and other kinds of like, ideas that, of course, we see a lot of the same things in math and science come up over and over again. And that is something great and beautiful about, this world. But to me, that as great as that is, in the investing world I have to live in, I live in a world of cash flows and revenue and things like that. And so what I have to do is work backwards. I've invested in science based companies for my whole life. And, what my job is to study the science, not to the point where I can compete with Scott Aronson intellectually, but to the point where I feel comfortable, where I understand it. And then my next goal is to sort of try to visualize the science translating into some kind of application. That application eventually has to translate into some kind of revenue, and the revenue has to translate into some kind of earnings. And by the time that happens, it's usually a long time, but the market can sniff out those early pieces of science that presage the early pieces of applications, that presage the early pieces of revenue that give rise to the profits at some point. So I think that, that is pretty normal for me to look at. And what I struggle with quantum, which I have not seen in some of the other fields I've been in, scientific fields. Weed is obviously not a scientific field, but it is a bubble. It was a bubble. This is in my opinion, a bubble in a scientific field. But just because there's science doesn't mean there's not a bubble. There are some things in science that are investable, some that are not. Technology is not always manifesting itself in a commercial opportunity, and it's not always manifesting itself in a stock. In this case, you sort of have a stock, and you have stocks, and they're sort of representative of those technologies. And I think that's what happened in genomics, where people got really excited about genomic technology. We can play with DNA in this really great way. So what stocks do I buy to take advantage of this? This is kind of like a natural way a lot of people think. It's very, I think, fallacious, but they do it anyway. And so they bought, the genomic stocks that really just didn't have anything to do with genomics, and half the time, and the other half the time just could not actually monetize or like commercialize genomics. So in any event, getting back to the point, I appreciate the overlaps as much as you do. I do think that there's, a lot of this, lateral or overlapping that happens among scientific fields. But I do still question kind of what AI is good for, and we'll talk about that in a second. But that's kind of what I want you to sort of focus on, and we'll talk about this in much more detail on the AI side. But I don't dispute that science often has these beautiful overlaps, and that we can't always foresee how they will overlap, and that things in quantum physics show up all over the place, and things in science show up in all kinds of disparate fields, including biology and other fields you might not naturally think of. So I do, want to ask the question, to what end? Now, you did provide kind of an answer there, which is AI. So I'm just going to write here, to what end? Which is, in investing, I mean, especially in publicly traded companies, there has to be an end, right? There's not too many publicly traded companies that I know that are just science projects. There ultimately has to be a business somewhere. It's great for MIT, it's great for, Harvard, but to a publicly traded company, revenue and sales are important. That's the end. So, that's sort of a question I would say for number two. For number three, AI needs quantum. So I couldn't disagree with this anymore. And again, I want to be careful not, appealing to authority, but I will say that the practitioners in the field don't agree with this. I think if you ask 10 out of 10, you ask 100 AI practitioners, which, I could do on my Twitter. I know a lot of AI people, CEOs of the biggest AI companies and employees of those very big AI companies, including NVIDIA. And, there doesn't seem to be an agreement with this. Now, you could be right and they could be wrong, which is fine. And then there are people looking into quantum machine learning, one of whom is the kind of EAC founder, Jeff Bezos, who was the quantum TensorFlow head at Google. And he also agrees with me that we're not going anywhere here. But it's not important to make teams and say, okay, well, this guy agrees with me and that guy agrees with you and so forth. I think the ultimate thing that's important is why. Why do they agree and why do they not agree? And I think that the key that Jensen said in one interview, someone said, well, why, Jensen? Why is quantum not useful? He said, quantum's useful for combinatorial problems. And AI isn't really a combinatorial problem. It's a large amount of data problem. So the biggest problems with like the H100 and the A100, these are NVIDIA's products, and the B100 is really a RAM problem. So like you actually do need to put the whole internet in these things to make tools. So you need bandwidth. And bandwidth is like, if you've studied the NVIDIA story, you know that their Mellanox acquisition, was very important to them. And putting all of this information through the training system is very, very hard to do. So you need huge amounts of bandwidth with VRAM specifically, and also across the nodes of a cluster. The nodes have to be connected, which is really painful because you can end up spending almost as much on the fabric, on the actual kind of like connective materials between these tools than you can on the machines themselves. That's a little exaggeration, but it is a really remarkable issue when you're trying to train over 1 million machines to keep those machines connected and so forth. Quantum, to me, and I could be wrong here, but to me, quantum is kind of the opposite, where it's like you have this one box and you can do this crazy like 10 to the 50th problem, but you have to set it up and you have to write a custom circuit. It's a single circuit that's like very specific, and that circuit, will run in a speed that, not even speed really, but more, because they're very slow actually, but in a way that can actually solve a very difficult combinatorial problem. The AI problems right now, at least, are very, very different. They are, I've got 100 exabytes of data. This is maybe a little exaggeration, but 100 exabytes of data, and you need to shove it into 100,000 H100s. This is, or 100,000 V100s. This is really hard because it's a lot of information. You can't really put information in quantum computer. It doesn't work that way. The bandwidth is too low. Most of these machines are somewhere between 100 hertz and, maybe, a megahertz at best, or I guess I should say a gigahertz at best. So, somewhere very, very, very low. And so I think that like maybe a megahertz is right actually. So you can't really run these machines very quickly, and the amount of data they can store is really limited. So at 165 qubits, there's actually no quantum memory at all. The most data you can fit in 165 qubits is no different than any other 165-bit system. So this is just what 20 bytes. It's not a lot. It's not a lot of. That's really not a lot of data to fit in. You have to feed that data into each qubit individually. So you have very, very little ability to actually run the program and store data. But it is very good for a program you can describe in relatively small amounts, where you could say, well, this qubit represents this and this qubit represents that. And you can sort of do some of this math where, you have, let's say, these qubits, and you can sort of say that, when this program's compiled, that these qubits represent, the solution to some complex question, and that in the right superposition, you will get the answer that is correct, that a normal computer could take a lot of time to answer. Now, as I've studied these things and written code in this space and talked to a lot of experts, my girl taught quantum complexity with Scott Aronson at MIT. We tried really hard to figure this out. Really, the only thing that is applicable here, and again, my girl works at one of the top AI companies, so if there's anybody that would appreciate quantum being useful for AI, I think it would be her, since she knows a little bit about quantum and she knows a lot of it about AI, and she doesn't see a connection or any valuable, kind of part at all. Now, maybe she's not thinking broadly enough or creatively enough, and it's hard to think that creatively. Real genius comes from that creative thinking. But I would say that what quantum is really good for is a combinatorial problem like Shor's. What is the, solving a biprime or some other discrete log problem, solving, something like a traveling salesman problem, or 3-SAT, or like any of these like very difficult combinatorial problems that are easy to put on paper, but really hard to solve, but not something that has a lot of data. AI is a lot of data. And Jensen said this many times, that these are really fundamentally different problems where AI is trying to take the petabytes of the internet, put them in an LLM, that's kind of the best thing we know of so far, and adjust. And I think that, whether it's diffusion models, which is kind of the second best, model, you're also still trying to take diffusion examples, training data, what doesn't matter what the model is, and you're trying to update weights. And the weights are enormous size, right? Like a lot of them don't even fit across, one machine. So by updating the weights, you need high throughput. So you need a machine that can prepare the quantum circuit, read through it, get the result out, and then update the weights. And we have a tool for this. It's the NVIDIA tool. And in fact, it's not too hard to use. It works really fast. So I don't personally see what quantum can add to AI. I could see what it could add to Shor's, which is I think a problem that is very limited in scope and importance, and then I can kind of see, some utility here, which is more like the final, like the next frontier for quantum is, whether it's quantum variational eigensolvers or other types of like quantum algorithms. These are the next level for quantum. But Shor's was the first thing that inspired quantum, and is probably the nearest term like actual thing that could be interesting, I think. But AI feels like it, for the reasons I've given, doesn't feel like AI and quantum even touch at all. So that's my 2 cents. I'm curious what you have to say.
Okay, first of all, thank you for the notes because I can use your notes now. Can you scroll up? Okay, so okay, can you remind me your first question about AI good?
Yeah, I mean, basically, your point, it wasn't a question, but your point was AI is good because it'll accelerate scientific achievements.
Okay, and yeah, yeah, zoom out. Thank you. Okay, so regarding the lateral overlaps, um, I, I mean, you're a star in pharma. Well, you really know a lot of pharma. Uh, um, I want to ask you a question about medicine. Would you agree that one of the greatest advancements in medicine in the 20th century was the use of MRI?
Sure.
Yeah, so you know because you've also covered it. MRI didn't come from doctors. It came from a physics discovery.
Right?
Um, I'm looking at the video to see that if your reaction. Now, um, the fact is that a huge advancement in medicine came from something that you know doctors couldn't even think of. I'm sure the physicists didn't also think about it. And the fact is that the nature of reality is much more connected than we think. So you can have the smartest people in AI thinking, "Oh, quantum is not related to AI," and that's fine. But they're seeing it from their perspective, and the tools they're using. Well, I think they're just going beyond what their creators or these smart people are thinking. They don't care about these boundaries. They look at a problem and they analyze the patterns, and then they try and see, can I advance it further? Can I what kind of tools can I use? They don't have any bias if it's from physics or from chemistry or whatnot. They don't care. So the same way that medicine got a breakthrough from physics, where both the medical people and the physicists didn't know anything about each other, I think that these breakthroughs can now happen even without people from the two fields knowing it happened because the patterns converged inside the AI models, and that's very important. Now, regarding your third point, you beautifully illustrated where quantum can help right now with combinatorial problems, and that's correct. But the question is now, can we reduce some of the problems? You also said there's a problem with memory. That's also correct. The question is, um, can we reduce some of the calculations to a combinatorial problem so that we can maybe leverage what we have in the quantum component? And I think this connects to what Jensen was talking about when he said that a CPU and a GPU and a QPU will live together side by side. And I think, I don't know what's the future going to hold, but I think that I can't say right now that you can't have any reduction that will be able will help AI leverage this combinatorial power to become better. I actually think that if you actually found something that you are much better than classical computation in. The question now remains, can I find the reduction to go into that field, do the calculation, and go back? That's a very hard question, and I think AI will probably be the best at answering it. I'm just saying it's not very clear to me right now that you can even imagine this connection, because the scientific work is moving from experts who are human to connectors which are in models. And the question is about reduction right now. I would trust Jensen if he said that he thinks there's a room for the three of them, but even he doesn't know. I mean, why are they giving this out to everyone in the world? Pretty much, I think they understand that there's a limit to what they can understand about their invention, and they have their own biases. And then they're like, let's see what happens. Let's see and like there's another claim that people talk about regarding uh, why do you think that a company like Rigetti or D-Wave or IonQ, why do you think they will beat Quantum and not Google or Microsoft? That's a good question. But if you look at AI, the company that brought it forward wasn't Google, even though they had most GPUs. Okay, it wasn't Microsoft. It was actually OpenAI. So it's funny how the disruptors, they usually don't come from the big companies. Um, are you there? Oh, okay. Um, so 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 all I'm saying is that it's you also said something about revenue streams and cash flows and stuff like that. It's also very important. I think the business is also having a revolution right now, because I don't know if even quarters are enough to assess the worth of a company where the advancement is so fast. Um, I'm sure I'm sure people will adapt and succeed in doing it, but there's a lot of changes happening right now, and all I'm saying is my quantum bullishness is about, can we positively say there's no reduction that can help speed computing with the through the quantum components? I can't say that. I don't think that anyone can say that. I think that AI models will be able to do something eventually. Like when I imagine AI models, I look at them as like big dragons, and everyone is trying to ride those dragons. And I think that scientific work is about who can ride these things and try to understand, try to build something and bring it back. But nothing is staying the same. Um, yes, if there's any question more, I'll be happy to
Okay.
answer.
Cool. Yeah. So I think I understand and agree with that. It is hard to predict where science will go. It's part of an investor's job, though, and it's hard to predict how big things will be. But what's interesting is you can kind of, I think, do this for the reasonable near term. So, for example, I can say, well, what does one of these companies have going on for, make my little financial model for 2026? All right, well, the technology isn't very useful. Why? Because the qubit fidelity isn't very good. So what will revenue be? Revenue will be from, governments, people experimenting, et cetera, et cetera. It's not going to be much, say 5 million. And then I can say, well, what's 27 going to look like? Well, the qubits will be better in that year, but I don't think it's going to change the demand. But, let's see what happens. Now, I keep thinking, well, what's going to happen in 2028? Well, maybe the qubits get better and better. But what are we going to use them for? What are the first customers going to care about? And as an investor, my job isn't to worry about, will somebody invent MRI 50 years from now? My job is to figure out, when will the first dollars start to come in from this? And try to keep my ear to the ground and say, okay, I can hear the elephants coming, or I can't. And there's no elephants coming. And so for now, having studied this field exhaustively, the best I can say is that at some point in the future, I don't know when, it could be in 2028, it could be in 2048, but at some point in the future, somebody's going to be interested in quantum for at least one application, which is Shores. And Shores I can put, I can put my finger on. And I worked with OpenAI's ChatGPT very extensively to speed up this elliptic curve cryptography, which quantum could be used for. And I begged ChatGPT to look at my work and take it seriously. And it just said, you know what? It's all really well-intended work. It's hard work, which I hope to publish or at least put on GitHub. But you're better off waiting for a quantum computer, Martin. And I sort of said, I would like to see if traditional computing can't get us to a shore-like, place at some point. And they said, unless you make a huge discovery, you have to wait for quantum before you can solve these problems. And I said, fine. And, of course, GPT thinks quantum's going to take a long time, just like everybody else. But my question is and I want to touch on the small versus big stuff in a second, but as an investor, sometimes you can think that the technology is going to change the world. 3D printing was a good example. People said, well, 3D printing is really important. Imagine manufacturing, all of manufacturing turned on its head, where anybody can make anything they want just by uploading some instructions. 3D printing hasn't changed the world. It certainly didn't change the stock market. All the 3D printing stocks dropped a lot. And the cycle of hype gave into a cycle of reality, which gave into a sort of depression because there was this realization that maybe this technology isn't that great. Maybe we overestimated the capabilities of this technology. And the same thing happened to CRISPR. CRISPR, you read about it and you say, wow, you can literally change, DNA. What an incredible invention. Then you read some more into it and you say, well, actually, you can only change DNA of liver cells. And, we have tons of technologies that are just as good, where you don't even need to change DNA. You could just silence the RNA, you can block the receptor, there's really not a need for it. And now you can't find one CRISPR stock that's worked and succeeded. And the question becomes, maybe CRISPR can edit other cells in 5 years or 10 years. They'll figure out a way, right? Well, they might, or they might not. We don't know. Antibodies are another example where antibodies could never get inside of cells. And people would have said, well, at some point, they'll get a way to put antibodies in cells. Well, it's been 50 years. And there's no way to put an antibody in a cell yet. So sometimes you can't just say, well, things will accelerate and then, there'll be some kind of, invention or some kind of discovery that will bring us the business nirvana, because business doesn't, I think, work that way. In business, we have to sort of see a date, a time, and we have to discount cash flows. Because if you tell me, well, there'll be an intrabody, someday, well, I could have been sitting there holding for 50 years before I found the intrabody. So in technology investing, you have to be realistic about when something's going to happen. Because if the next quantum computing application happens in 2068, you can't really, in good faith, say, I told you so, Martin. I think I would raise my hand and say I was right, that it was going to take forever and nothing happened. So you can't, necessarily pick when those laterals and overlaps will happen. MRI and NMR are really good examples of physics turning into real world, work and real world applications. MRI industry isn't very big, and NMR industry isn't very big either. So this comes to valuation, where we have to actually think about what are we paying for, and why are we paying it, and that's what investing is. That's what I'm really, really good at. And I look at these values and say, if I can have D-Wave for free, maybe I'd buy it. Or IonQ, maybe. But you still have capital that has to be invested. And that capital has to have a positive return. And it's hard to know if it will have a positive return. you may not get back a return of your capital, let alone a return on your capital. So the speculation is awesome. It's what makes science interesting. But for business, oftentimes I think investors want to know what's the application. And so for parallel computing, Jensen had a really good application, video games. And it created a $10 billion company. It was fantastic. And of course, it turns out that parallel computing can also power AI. That's wonderful for Jensen and terrible for Intel. Let me just finish real quick. So we could have bought Intel and said, well, Intel is a master of computing, and who knows what'll happen in the future of computing. Maybe they'll be able to do parallel computing. Well, NVIDIA did parallel computing. Intel's sitting there laying off people. The stock has been a dog, etc. Superconducting is another field that's gone nowhere. You could have bought superconducting stocks 40 years ago. They've just been a crummy field waiting for success. So I think it does matter what the scientific field is, what specifically is exciting, because there are a wide array of scientific exciting adventures that you can go on. CRISPR is a good one. Imagine every disease solved with CRISPR someday. Why don't we load the boat of CRISPR stocks? Well, you can buy CRISPR stocks trading at cash value, let alone multi-billion values. The market's paying $10 billion for IonQ. There's no technology there that's worth anything. But the market's paying for it because we're in a bit of a hype cycle. CRISPR at one point was the same exact thing. CRISPR stocks were trading for billions, and now you can basically get them for free because people got disenchanted with the technology. They lost interest, they lost excitement because the actual reality didn't match the hype. And that cycle can go on for decades, decades. So I think that when you invest, you want to compound your capital, right? You want to make 10% a year or 20% a year. And people do that different ways. Some people do that by investing really early, 20, 30 years in advance, and just waiting for the 100x. Even if it takes 20 years, 100x makes you a great return over the long run. And if you can't see 20 years in the future, well, that's your problem. Because if somebody can, and they know for sure that in 20 years there's going to be a major, major breakthrough and a major application that's going to be a big market, then it's worth waiting the 20 years. Now, of course, the problem is you don't know what's going to happen over 20 years with Silicon Valley. Is there going to be financing available? Is this the right management team? Will there be a new company that comes in? So there's always risk. Just because if a technology is hot doesn't mean that, as I said the other day, there's about 30 serious quantum companies with serious capital. There's 4 that are publicly traded. The rest are private or part of big companies. So why are these 4 special? They're not. In fact, odds are in 10 or 20 years, most of them won't exist. And it would be Facebook that wins the internet instead of Yahoo. And as an investor, my job is to avoid crazy risks and even short crazy risks. And the crazy risk is that these 4 companies, 2 of which are not even really quantum, they'll actually be some discovery, and there'll actually be an application that will actually result in revenue that is actually worth the bet. Not that there'll ever be an application. I'm sure there'll be an application for quantum someday. I'm sure. The question is, what stock do I bet on now, and why, at what price? And I don't think you can say, well, the application is going to be so big that it'll just be worth any price, because that's, if you look at MRIs, again, there's a handful of companies that deal in MRIs. It's a multi-billion-dollar market, but it ain't AI. It ain't GPUs. It ain't CRISPR. It ain't some massive industry. It's maybe a $50 billion industry. And right now, quantum in total is worth more than 50 billion. So if you think about the market cap you're paying now for potentially something possibly working in the future, it has to be worth 100 billion or 200 or 500 or a trillion. But we can't even think about what that looks like. And I don't think it's easy to just say, well, superposition is a really powerful thing. Sure it is. So is gravity. Why aren't we betting on gravity? It's not obvious why or what, we're going to get out of this. And as a guy that I'm running H100s right now, running very compute sensitive calculations. I would love a quantum computer. And I've tried all the ones that are available. They don't do anything yet. And I'm going to try them next year. And I'm going to try them the year after. And I'm going to be the first guy to try every new quantum computer. But the problem is, I'll start thinking about buying these stocks and I have a vivid imagination, when I can imagine an actual use. Then, and only then, am I going to get interested in these kinds of like very amorphous, like, science shows up everywhere, it all overlaps, it's going to, be valuable someday. I need to know what it is. I can't just sort of buy these stocks at a valuation that's very high. It'd be one thing if they're brand new startups trading at 10 million Series A, 20 million, but at multi-billion dollar values, I've never seen in my investing career something that makes sense like that. I've invested in novel science, but it's typically at a very low valuation because the risk is so high. It's about as speculative as it gets. So I need to get a huge reward to take on that kind of speculative scientific risk. Here, I'm getting the opposite. I'm taking on this huge risk at a 5 billion valuation for one of these, at a $10 billion valuation for another, but nobody's told me what the upside is and when it's coming. And I have to guess. And the guess is probably going to be similar to CRISPR, similar to 3D printing. There's going to be snags, there's going to be problems. And do I have to wait 20 years? Do I have to wait 50 years? Do I have to wait 80 years? There's no telling. Will those be pulled in by AI? Sure, but if it gets pulled in 60 years to 40 years, I'm not sure it helps me very much. So that's kind of how I think of these things as an investor. And I think we should pivot our discussion to that, because the science side is lovely, and we're not even touching on the deep details of the science, but it's not tangible enough. We can't sit and say as investors, oh, just hope that some point some good thing is going to happen, and be price independent. Don't worry if it's a 10 billion. Don't worry if it's 1 billion. Would I buy these stocks if it was 100 billion value? Of course not. Would I buy them for $1 trillion value? You'd have to be out of your mind. Would I buy them for $1 billion? I did my first quantum computing video when these stocks were trading at 100 million and $1 billion. I said, they're not bad. Maybe something will come of this thing. So, I'm price dependent, as all investors should be. There's a price where none of this shit makes sense. There's a price where you sell NVIDIA. If somebody said NVIDIA's trading at 100 trillion, I'd say, I don't care how good it is. If it's trading at 100 trillion, it better be making like 2 trillion in earnings or something. And, that's not where we're at. So to me, the price matters a lot. Anyway, that's kind of my thought on this.
Okay, so let me quote a very smart person. When you want to know if there's money to be made, you have to ask yourself 3 questions. Will there be money to be made in that thing? Who will make that money? And is the price right? So that person was you. And I always ask myself this question. And in the base of it, I think the real topic is risk, as you correctly identified. And I think that in quantum, you correctly identified that I am assuming acceleration happening here. But I think that not every assumption of acceleration is equal. For 3D printing and for CRISPR, I don't think it's the same as quantum. Why? Well, AI is the biggest breakthrough that we've ever had, pretty much. And probably the earliest thing, like the only thing that is comparable is maybe the invention of electricity. Now, when electricity was invented, there was a discussion, I'm sure you know, between Edison and Tesla on how to commercialize it. And Edison wanted to build power plants pretty much everywhere. And Tesla said, there's got to be a better way. And he found it with the alternative current. Edison tried to electrify elephants, saying that alternative current wasn't safe. It was actually direct current he used there, but And now, when I'm looking at AI, I see that the biggest problem right now is energy. And what do they want to do with energy? They want to create nuclear reactors everywhere. Now, isn't it similar to what Edison had in mind, where pretty much everyone is having their own power plant uh, in their vicinity. Uh, I think that that's certainly one way to think of how AI can scale. And I think you can see what's going on with Oklo and Lightbridge and the uranium companies. That's certainly one place you can go to, and you can find investments over there. I'm sure that with Sam Altman and Oklo, the fact that you have probably one of the smartest people in the world with the best model ever opening a company in the realm of energy, that's that tells you all you need to know about where things are going. But still, having to build a plant in having to build a small nuclear reactor in any place you want to build a plant, that still too much reminds me of what Edison had in mind. So I'm asking myself, okay, if I don't want to wait for the supply chains to get, like, I'm putting investment in nuclear energy, okay. But then I'm putting myself in the shoes of NVIDIA or other AI companies, and I'm like, okay, if I don't want to put all my money on 10x shipping their high grade uranium to us in time, what other choice do I have? And and I don't think I would ask that question on 3D printing, because 3D printing, I don't see its close correlation with AI. I also don't think I would ask it on CRISPR. I think that these people are saying to themselves, how can I make AI better? I can use nuclear energy, but that's there's so many variables there. Okay, what else can I do? And as an investor, I then ask myself, okay, what can they do? And I think that the what they can try and do is try and find something in the computational models or algorithms and stuff like that, and that immediately brings quantum to the picture. So when I say that acceleration has different settings and the assumption of acceleration is dependent on other factors, I think we have to put that in mind. Nuclear energy, uranium mining in the US has been staggering, and even if you get all the uranium there, you're still building nuclear reactors everywhere, like Edison had in mind. I think maybe that'll happen someday, but that's also very dangerous. People will look for other ways to go, and then they will lead into to
Okay,
algorithmic and computational,
and that's fine. But
and then
how in the
quantum.
world can quantum help AI in that case? Like
Because
quantum, you cannot adjust qubits very quickly, and in AI,
no,
you
no,
need to zap lots of information through.
you said that you also agreed that quantum is successful in doing the combinatorial
Yes,
calculations better,
very good at
right?
that. Yes.
Okay, so the question is now, okay, we know that combinatorial calculations work better on quantum. Now we need to think
In 30
about
years,
how.
when the machines are built, theoretically,
No,
yes, but
I
not
don't think,
today.
because if you look at the work being done right now, actually China is putting out a lot of papers about how to um, fine tune and AI models using quantum instrument. China is also putting in a lot of
Okay.
money
Let's
into this.
talk about one or two of those things. So the first thing I'd say is right now these machines don't do anything. Otherwise, I would steal all the Bitcoin in the world. And
Yeah, I heard that interview.
that's my main interest in quantum, and my main interest in cryptography is breaking
Do you
Bitcoin.
agree about the acceleration setting being different for different
Yeah,
inventions?
I think so. In fact, I think what's tricky about this is that a big part of what quantum needs is material science and laser and things like that, which I'm not sure LLMs are that helpful for because they're physical sciences and experimental regimes where like math is a place where like there is no physical regime, it's all abstract. So I think math benefits more from AI than quantum. But let's take a step back for a second and um, talk about either crypto or AI fine tuning models. So fine tuning models is so the word fine tune itself means something in AI, right? It means you're changing the weights and biases of the output layer of a model. Models are parameterized by weights and biases. They have layers of neurons. The deeper the layer, the more complex the model. This is what the word deep learning came from. So some of the models now have 100 layers. So you take the last 2 or 3 layers and adjust them to fine tune a model. This isn't exactly probably what you mean by fine tuning, because again, AI is not we can fine tune models without quantum. We don't need quantum. Fine tuning is something that moves fairly quickly, actually, because you don't have to retrain the whole model. Training the whole model is hard. I think what some people think AI and quantum intersect is for hyperparameter tuning. So this is like a different version of the word fine tuning, but it's not the technical version of fine tuning. So, tuning the hyperparameters of a model is something that you could consider a combinatorial problem. The problem with this is that it's not something that vexes AI researchers. Most AI researchers aren't sitting there worried about their loss rate and other things like that being perfect. I think that, we get bigger compounding by doing things like more data, cleaner data, things like that. So if you talk to 10 out of 10 AI researchers, could you use this technology for that? Yes. Is it worth it? Is it valuable? I don't think they would spend $1 on a quantum computer to do hyperparameter tuning, because it's also very hard to tell which hyperparameters are useful. If you do the loss schedules and all of these things with the hyperparameters, if you ever train an AI model, you know what I'm talking about. It's a little bit of voodoo, and you don't really know exactly what to expect until the end. So I'm not sure that quantum is going to be that helpful for doing this, especially because the throughput of quantum is basically 0. You can only do, especially on ion traps are so slow. They'll never be more, I can't say never, but ion traps are 1,000,000 times slower than superconductors. Now, on the flip side, they're more stable and potentially more scalable. The superconductor people say the opposite. Superconductors are fast, so maybe we could use superconductors. Well, there hasn't been much progress there. The superconducting qubit world has been stuck in the same place for a really long time. And, maybe we can get to a place where you can shove tons of information quickly through a quantum computer. But if you look at Jensen's thing he just showed, you get a little machine that said, I can put the whole internet bandwidth through this thing. The whole internet. Which is all the bandwidth of the internet that happens today, I can put through this machine. And it was another fabric tool, which is, again, important for the north-south, or is it east-west, more east-west, communication between nodes in a GPU cluster. So to me, I feel really like we're grasping and reaching for this kind of thing where we just don't know, where it could be useful. I think the AI people are not that excited about quantum. And the fact that they're excited about nuclear, we have a lot of energy in this country. We can power all the AI right now. The reason that these guys are interested in nuclear is because they're thinking that AI is going to take so much energy up. Right now, it's about 1%, of the energy we use. But they think it's going to go up to 50%, and then 500%, and then 5,000%. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. But if we need 50x more energy to power AI, that'd be something else. I don't think that's going to happen. But just in case it happens, the big AI companies are getting really excited about trying to find the energy. And that could be a proprietary thing where, we invested early in getting these energy resources, so now we can actually do our AI. I don't see the connection between quantum alleviating that bottleneck. It's not a bottleneck that actually exists right now. It's a bottleneck that these companies think might exist in the future. Right now, if you want to run, 100,000 GPUs, there's plenty of power plants that'll take your business and they'll say, you can have all this energy, we'll cut off this Bitcoin miner, and you're fine. I think that, in 20 years, we might need nuclear fusion, and, you might be able to have an edge by having that, and there might be pushback on how much energy we should actually give to, some of these guys. Now, China's, in my opinion, a whole other thing. I don't think that China, one, they love espionage. They love breaking communications. Like, a big thing of what China does is they steal, as we all know. And they love to steal intellectual property. Getting through Shores allows them to steal intellectual property all around the world, eavesdrop on messages, so forth. So for them, quantum computing is very interesting from that perspective. I think that the questions still remain about quantum computing for other applications. I think outside of Shores, there's not like a specific algorithm that quantum can do things faster than NVIDIA, for example. Shores is the only proof where you can get a complexity change. You can actually solve a very hard problem faster. And I think that's still the case. I think Grover's is a much less impressive one, for example. And there aren't a whole lot of strong algorithms that you can point to. Say quantum can help AI. Okay, maybe, but how? How specifically? What computation will it do faster than a regular computer can do that will help and it all be related to it? So far, the only legitimate answer I've heard is Shores. Now, could there be a new answer down the road? Well, Shores is 30 years old. These things just don't pop up, right? This is a major change in complexity. And there's nobody that's saying that we're going to get a new one around the corner. These things are like laws of nature almost. So they're really hard to just discover and come up with. We probably will get another one at some point. But these breakthroughs are really slow in coming. And again, the physical problem with throughput in these machines makes them designed not for AI, but much, much, much more for, here's a secret code between 1 and 2 to the 256. Where's the code? Well, Shores can figure that out. But here's 200 terabytes of data, put it in the model. Well, these machines, if you look at the throughput, they're literally 100 hertz, 100 instructions a second. That is slow. That is not going to, that program wouldn't finish for millions of years just because you can't drip, I drop all of the data drop by drop by drop. You need something really fast. And again, maybe they'll come up with something really fast. But the problem is when you're setting up these quantum states, they're so fragile and you have to carefully have a laser stop the ion from moving and trap it in a location and have in this pressure vacuum. That's not a fast operation inherently, like a switch on a transistor. Now, could they make it fast? Again, maybe so, but it still won't be as fast as transistors. So these are really good machines for solving a cryptographic problem, maybe solving a traveling sales problem or optimization problem. But again, I dispute that. There's been a lot of disputes about this lately from my end on can you do a Garobi faster than an annealer? And in fact, there's somebody that did ECC on an annealer, which was really fun. But again, to a really small toy curve. The actual ECC curve would never work on a D-Wave or on any other computer for that matter. So we're in the stage where these prototypes are fascinating, but they don't work or do anything useful. So as an investor, you basically have to say, I'm going to wait until the prototype works. But these companies are going to spend money between now and then. There's going to be bull markets and bear markets, and we have to wait and see if AI will accelerate some of these things that are either just not possible, for example, the CRISPR analogy, or could be possible, but we don't know when that's going to happen, or stuff that seems likely to happen but isn't that exciting, like Shores. I have no doubt Shores will be implemented, and RSA and ECC will be broken. A lot of Israelis are focused on this too. It was one of the best code-breaking communities in the world, and some of the best mathematicians too. But what good is code breaking for? It was not even clear the NSA cares that much. The Chinese care quite a lot because they want to know which spies are in China that are Americans secretly acting on their behalf. They want to kill those guys. They're very interesting culture. But Chinese science is not yet something to be jealous of. I think a lot of us still are suspicious of Chinese achievements in Chinese science, and that maybe they're the leading beacon for the future. But I'm not yet convinced that the Chinese are really that special in anything. They're very good at copying, but outside of Shores breaking some encrypted messages, that's the most likely thing, and it's the least exciting thing. Breaking encryption's useful, but already moving on to post-encrypted technologies. So to me, I don't see anything
Like if I use my wildest imagination for a use for quantum, say infinite compute at low cost, I don't get that excited about that. Why? Well, NVIDIA has this temporary lock on this market, but deep speed shows you, as a deep seek, I should say, shows you that with the right optimizations and enough time, software finds a way to. That's why I don't think we're going to need nuclear energy for AI. Software gets better. Software, at some point, gets so good that the chips are too powerful for the software. And this happened with Intel. And you get a bear market in the hardware and a bull market in the software. And then you get the other way around where the hardware wins because the software is gated by the hardware. But in general, one of the bear cases for NVIDIA is we just make better algorithms. And with those algorithms, we don't need 100,000 GPUs. Maybe we need 10. And I think that's the biggest bear market biggest bear thesis for NVIDIA. So if you told me today, Martin, I can compute any amount of things at any amount of speed, what do you want to do with it? And what did you pay for it? I'd sit there and say, the best I can come up with is, I'd probably make the world's best AI. But the problem with that is you still need data cleaning. You still need data acquisition. You still need good algorithms. Like, it's not just a compute problem. And the compute problem that exists, it's not really even that gated by NVIDIA. It's more gated by the other stuff I'm talking about. Because you can have a million H100s or B100s, but you're going to make an LLM, and in 5 years, you can probably do that same exact thing with much cheaper resources. Now, you might be able to do something even more complicated. We're very creative people with more resources, but it doesn't seem to me like infinite compute is the great unlock that we think it is. Now, people at OpenAI and other places would probably disagree with that and say, we've shown that the more compute we throw at things, the more intelligent they become. And that's not untrue. And I do think that's a bull thesis. But the kind of compute quantum can do is not the kind of compute that these machines can do. Now, you mentioned a lot about problem isomorphism. Can you take one problem and coerce it to being another problem? And this is really interesting. Again, my field that I'm interested in, ECC, a Polish group was able to take ECC and isomorphize it, in essence, into an Euler problem, a cubo problem, which was really cool. A lot of times in science, you can do this. You can take a problem and recast it, twist it and turn it, and all of a sudden it's a different problem. Now, ECC has always, to me, been a quantum problem. So it's not that surprising that you can do it on an Euler. And in a lot of these problems are kind of like, lowest energy state, solving for a minimum or maximum. That's kind of a general question in science in general. But again, you're going to throughput problems. So, could I use an infinite compute? Yes, probably could find some really cool things to do with that. But I need infinite bandwidth to the machine. If you're telling me the machine can only load 1 bit at a time very slowly, but it's like it's like one of these guns that like you gotta and then it's ready to shoot a really powerful bullet. That's what like quantum is like. You gotta prepare the bullet so carefully, calibrate the gun. Okay, it's ready to shoot, and it's gonna be the fastest, hardest bullet you've ever seen. Whereas NVIDIA's AK-47, it's just it shoots really fast. It's easy to set up. It has a huge amount of bandwidth. But quantum is like, no, every bullet's got to be prepared for 20 minutes, and then it can shoot it. Well, you would say, okay, if I'm in an army, I'm going to use this gun for some things. I'm going to use that gun for the other things. And that makes sense. And it's pretty unlikely that I'm ever going to use gun 1 for the things that gun 2 is good at. It's pretty unlikely I'm going to use gun 2 for the things gun 1's good at. So the question is, what are the things that gun 2 is good at? And again, the single shot rifle is really good for Shor's algorithm and getting that exact combinatorial question. What is the best number out of all these numbers using this curve or this formula or whatever? And how do I coerce that into solving other problems that I need? Maybe there's a way. Again, so far, the most creative people in technology, can't really find that great use case for it. The person that agrees with you in general is Sundar. Sundar is basically saying, we don't know what these machines will be good for, but we're going to build them just to build them. And that's like a very scientifically good idea. And I love it. The problem is the price. I don't want to pay for a dream. I can go to Founders Fund or A16Z here. Watch this trick. I can do this really fast. This is a firm. I like these guys. I have a good friendship with them. They have some of the coolest technological companies in existence. Here's a whole list of these companies. What these guys do are some of the coolest, wildest technologies you've ever seen in life. They find them and then they'll invest in them. And the problem is all of these, these guys are doing phage cocktails. Nobody makes macrophages. Phage cocktails for different tools and things like that. You can buy these stocks for very little. And they're the highest end technology stocks in the world. And these guys got all the good stuff early. They were first in Anduril, they were first in all that other stuff. So which of these is going to be the big winner? Well, science is everywhere. We see all kinds of this stuff, right? So why D-Wave? Well, I can buy any of these. In fact, I could buy this whole portfolio of companies, maybe not Palantir, but most of these companies for the same price as D-Wave. So I've got one cruddy quantum company versus, a vast array of really exciting startups. And I can pick A16Z, I can pick any of these things. And I get the same thing, Founders Fund, whatever. So why this stock instead of a rich portfolio of high-tech stuff? Well, it's all about price. I'm not paying several $1 billion for D-Wave. That's crazy. There's no application coming. There's no obvious, thing. We got 5 billion market cap. They got no revenue. They're saying quantum is now, but nothing's happening. This whole thing is kind of a charade. But I can take that same 5 billion and say, they own 10 to 20% of each of those companies with 1 billion. So I can basically own all of those companies for 5 billion, and they're all just as exciting. All of the things you said about the future and technology bringing things forward, and so all that applies to all these guys, except you get a big diversity of management teams, different applications, etc., fine-picked by some really smart technologists. That's a much better bet to me than, betting that D-Wave is going to succeed. So I think it is all about price, and that's really where our difference is. I am fine with doing high-tech work and doing high-tech research. There's no problem with that. I love doing that. I do it myself. But why should I pay $5 billion for what this company has done, where they haven't yet generated really that much that's exciting? They're not telling you that tomorrow we're going to solve Shores or implement Shores. They're not telling you tomorrow we're going to have infinite compute. They're just telling you we're working on cool stuff. We'll see what happens. Well, that's great. That's called a venture capital fund. I don't need to pay 10 billion for that. I can pay cash value for that. So to me, it's all about price, and I think that we're probably not too far apart on the technology side, because there's a reason I like quantum so much. I like to look at it so much, because I love the technology. I love all peripheral bleeding edge technology. That's what I love in life. It's such a joy to look at this stuff. But as an investor, I got to pay a good price for it if I'm going to invest in it.
Can I respond?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, okay. So I'm very happy that we have come to an agreement about the opportunity here. I do think that the companies, we can debate about their evaluation, because I agree with you. There is a discussion to be made, and that discussion is not very simple, because how can you evaluate what they're doing? Now, let me detail what I mean here. As you said at the beginning of your answer, you said that a very big problem is physical AI. Most of this AI is right now. You see it helps with math, for example. What? Can I continue?
I'm sorry.
What?
We're in a channel with some people here. Some people showed up, so please go ahead.
Oh, okay. So you said that right now you see AI evolving math a lot because it's theoretical. I agree with it very much. And you also said that in quantum you're going to have problems because of throughput. I also agree with it very much. But right now you focused on the problem, which is AI right now is not physical, and many of the problems we have with quantum is physical. However, you also see that companies like Tesla and Figure AI are breaking this barrier and essentially building physical AI. Now, when physical AI comes, I think it's going to be a very hard problem to distinguish between hardware and software. And I think that would be a problem because some of the changes these models would do is going to be very hard to understand what they're doing. They're going to succeed in doing tasks much better, but I don't know how they can communicate back to us because, like, we can understand. We have our own frames of conception of biology and chemistry and stuff like that. We agreed that these models they don't have these biases. They can detach themselves from it and they can run freely on basis pretty much. You also said magic earlier. Exactly, that's magic. What they're doing with the minimizing the cost function is insane. They sometimes even change the cost function. So it's like, I don't know what they're doing, but it works. And I think that when physical AI comes, uh, Tesla next month and Figure AI later, you're going to have this connection between physical and computational and theoretical. And the robots won't be just the shape of humans. They'll also be smaller. I'm sure they can be also bigger. You can imagine like SpaceX rockets as robots. You can imagine smaller robots also. You can imagine even robots working in the level of the um, um, processor and the chips. I think this is coming. And so a very important question is, like you talked about evaluating quantum on basis of how far we are from a breakthrough because the prices doesn't make sense. So I'm asking, where do you think this breakthrough is going to happen? I mean, once physical and AI start working together, do you think researchers will be able to say, "Hey, we did a breakthrough"? I mean, who's going to publish papers in like 15 years? Because we're basically going to look at a black box of AI. That's what I think, and we're going to try and understand what happened here. Now, if you
Yeah, I was going to say that I do think scientific literature is going to change quite a bit because a lot of it's AI assisted now, and it's going to get even more AI assisted. I almost started to write a paper on this little tiny breakthrough I made, and I was just like, okay, I have to explain what the AI did, not what I did.
exactly. So and the thing is, and now we go back to quantum. AI has this bottleneck with energy and with the
Not
computational
yet.
model. I'm
Not
not saying
yet. Not yet, though.
no. The people in the industry think that scaling, the main challenges to scaling are going to be energy
But they could
and
be wrong.
yeah, I know. I'm just saying. I'm just
They're wrong.
explaining. I'm just following their logic. Okay.
Yeah, I just think that like even those people, not all of them are investing in energy. By the way, only Sam.
No, I know. I don't know if
Microsoft
if
is
a lot.
Microsoft is too, but like there is totally a thesis where we're just going to get really good at algorithms, and these machines are also not going to stop. Like Nvidia's boxes will get better too, and we're just not going to need 100,000 of these machines. This is the only time in human civilization where we needed 100,000 boxes to calculate something, and it's probably because of bottleneck in hardware. Now, could that continue and get worse? Yes, could be possible. But more likely than not, because of what we've seen with DeepSeek, I think we're just going to get good at, using these machines better. Even from a couple of years ago, algorithms are up like 100x in speed ups. So I don't know. I think the energy thing is like a just in case more than it is okay, we need this energy bottleneck now. So when you say energy bottleneck, I just have to step in and say, what energy bottleneck?
No, because I'm just following, as an investor. So I look at Trump and what he's saying about energy. I look at Amazon, Oracle, the new Stargate project. I look at Sam Altman and his project, and I say, okay, so they're worried about energy, so they are foreseeing, maybe a just in case of a problem in the future with scaling. So then I'm like, okay, so there's a problem with scaling that they want to solve, but nuclear energy is very hard to solve because we can barely talk to to each other, let alone nations talking to each other, and many of these supply chains don't exist yet. So then I'm like, okay, so how can we solve the problem of scaling without improving our energy efficiency or energy consumption or energy mechanisms? And then I think, okay, so there's a computational challenge here, and then you're right to say, okay, so then I go specifically into quantum, but you can also go to the computer you researched a couple of days ago. There's a lot of directions here. So I chose quantum because I look at I looked for other computers and I thought that other directions, and I thought that this is um, the ripest in a way, because I think that physics has been left behind for quite some time, and I think the physicists are, I don't know, I think that there many physicists are upset that, like, that the last one winning the Nobel Prize were computer physicists. I think that for a very long time physicists have been lacking in breakthroughs, and I think that with AI combining the theoretical, the abstract models of LLMs with the physical AI is going to put in the physicist's hands a lot of power to redesign their theories. Who thus far they failed.
Well, let's get back to price, because at the end of the day, all of this is about price. Because technology is fantastic. We all love technology. But I showed you 8VC. When 8VC invests in one of these new startups that is also high, those guys think their technology is as good as quantum or better. Some of them are working on really cool stuff. It's a 50 million valuation, 100 million valuation. It's not 5 billion.
But I specifically focused about physicists because I said that AI is going to put power in the hands of people who really didn't have a lot of power before, and so I'm looking for scientific communities who want a breakthrough in any way, shape, or form. Einstein was like the biggest scientist. There were, like,
But
if
you're
we
not
talk
listening.
about the basics.
You're not listening to me. I'm talking about valuation. Why
No,
should? Yeah.
I know, but I just, before we continue to evaluation, I wanna conclude the previous discussion. Do you agree that um, quantum can help scale computing?
Not necessarily.
For AI?
Like I said with the gun, the whole gun analogy. If the computing is computing a biprime, yes, or a point on an elliptic curve, absolutely it can help. If the computing is training an AI model, I don't think it can help.
But you said that computation can become much better using nuclear energy, and you said that it might not be important, right?
Yeah, I do think that just through software means alone, I mean, I've even done some of these things like PyTorch, which was written by humans, that trains most of the world's models. PyTorch is very inefficient, and the PyTorch team discovers inefficiencies all the time. They improve them. NVIDIA improves them. There's all kinds of architectural improvements that software people make. I don't think nuclear matters yet. Nuclear is just where you put the plug in, right? Whether it's coal or nuclear or wind power, my energy prices haven't gone up yet. AI has not really made a big difference yet in energy prices. If it does, then you'll see oil at 200. You can go long oil, and just oil will be at 500 a barrel if AI is dominating all energy needs. But so far, obviously, it's a drop in the bucket. So to me, I think that quantum, maybe, if they can make the machines, which I do think they will someday, if they can make the machines, quantum will be very useful for very specific combinatorial mathematical problems like RSA and ECC, those problems are not the same as large-scale data problems like AI training models, which require bandwidth on the machine. So there's bus bandwidth, and then there's processing speed. And you can circumvent processing speed in AI using the quantum effects, but you can't really get a good bus speed or an input-output speed because these machines are not really made like the way we are used to. Now, could they make it better? I'm sure they could. But for now, nobody would want to use these machines to do model training or something like that. You would want to use them to do, again, I would love to have a quantum computer for cryptographic reasons. But I don't think I would throw away the computer for AI. There's nothing I would do with that. I'd much rather have 100 NVIDIA boxes than a quantum computer for now. Now, again, can things change in the future? Yes, but I can only go on what I see today. And of course, I'm not stupid. If I saw fast scaling, I would say, yeah, look, obviously they're not ready yet, but in 6 months or a year or 2 years or 5 years, they'll be ready. But I'm not seeing that kind of scaling. And maybe it's a problem they'll work on some other day when they get the current batch of problems solved. But I think we've got a really long time before we're doing too much with quantum. First stop is Shores, and it's not even clear we're going to get to that first stop.
Yeah. So do you
Can I
agree
give
that?
my perspective really quick? I'm just thinking it might add some color.
No, we made this a dialogue for a reason. I appreciate it. Let's just wrap it up with Loop and your thoughts. I mean, again, I think it's all about valuation. All science is cool. Where does price matter for you?
Yeah. So just to understand, so do you agree that reduction to the combinatorial problem is a challenge that if they solve can improve their performance?
Of course, but not all problems can be isomorphized to another. I mean, just because a few problems can be does not mean.
Okay, no.
Like, for example, a really
I
big
understand.
A problem with 100 terabytes of data could never be put into a single, very simple, formula. You can isomorph.
Maybe a component of it, maybe a part of it.
Perhaps.
Yeah, and do you also agree that there's a physical problem right now with quantum in that the devices are very slow and it's, yeah, do you agree with that?
Yeah, currently early generation technology, obviously.
Yeah. Now, do you think that with physical AI, it might be faster in creating and doing feedback for the system? Do you think it is possible?
It's not clear. So I would say on physical AI, we're all excited about robotics, but there are many robotics bears, including people in AI who think that we're not going to get robots walking around serving us lunch and breakfast and carrying us on piggyback for at least the next 10 or 20 years. Some people think it's happening tomorrow, and everybody has to place their bets and figure that out. But again, the bet has to be governed by some price. Figure is 50 billion valuation right now. Do you think?
That's it.
I
agree.
Do you think it's a good price or not? It could be the best price ever. It could be the worst price ever. We don't know.
Yeah.
But so anyway, the point is, to your question is, I don't know 100%. It seems to me personally that AI tuning a laser or like figuring out how to make a better laser and fabricating it physically, that's a much harder challenge than AI solving Riemann hypothesis or some breakthrough in PNP or something like that, where, AI can probably sit there and think just as good as a mathematician at some point soon. But I don't think it's going to be able to sit there and tinker with fabrication and all kinds of power tools, looking under microscopes and like doing all this work. That seems further away, but I do think it'll happen someday. I mean, I do think AI will that field as well will work out with AI.
Okay, I'm glad because we agree on a lot of things. Now, regarding evaluation, listen, I don't know how to evaluate these companies so well because we can look at revenue and then we can say they're overpriced. We can also say that about Palantir, although Palantir has, I think, amazing leadership, very good in communicating and performing and delivering. Regarding the four companies, for me, I don't really like QUBT. I had to message them like 5 times and through different platforms to change the date on their website for 2024 to 2025, and they eventually changed it, but they never said thank you. Uh, uh, and regarding the companies, it's a very hard question to know how to evaluate them for me, because I'm thinking, well, they have some patents, they have some papers. Um, what path will an AI that does the abstractions, or the physical AI that helps with overcoming the quantum challenges, which I think is closer than we think. I don't think it's like the Riemann hypothesis. I don't know what tools that AI is going to use. If it's one of these tools for by these companies, I think putting in a small amount for a year in these companies and seeing what happens is not that terrible. But I do think that making such an investment, you have to check up on these companies a lot. That means also checking papers, checking patents, checking interviews, checking their seminars and their lectures. Always trying to understand if they are creating enough important knowledge so that an AI can um, pull forward from that. I was actually very disappointed in how they interacted with Jensen in their quantum day, because they were argumentative, where they could have just said, "Listen, we exist pretty much because of you. Because of you, we can research the most important things in the world, and we have a much better chance of like reaching our dreams and actually creating quantum computer. And when that happens, we'll be the happiest one, and we'll give it back to you so you can do better AI." And then there's a feedback because we will use it again. I think they really missed that shot, because I think Jensen also told them, "Listen, you have a shot here. Don't try to create a wave on your own. Try and ride the wave that's already here." And they botched it in a way. Um, so from an evaluation standpoint, I think a risky investment that one has to do, and then he or she has to follow it up a lot for a substantial amount of times, and it might all go away. So, because I do agree that most of the quantum companies won't be here in very soon.
Okay. I mean, yeah, to me, there's a big difference between paying $1 billion for something and paying $5 billion for something, right? I mean, that's,
Yes.
to me, really, really fundamentally important. And without that kind of, critical kind of thinking, all the other thoughts kind of go out the window, because unless you're saying, well, the upside is 100 billion. If the upside is 100 billion, I don't even care if it's 1 billion, 5 billion, or 10 billion. But the problem is, if the upside is just 5 billion and you're paying 5 billion for it now, there's no upside, because, you're already factoring in the most successes possible. I don't doubt that quantum will be an industry. I have no doubt about that. It'll be some amount of either millions or billions of dollars. It may even be tens of billions of dollars, but I don't think it's going to be hundreds of billions of dollars. So as an investor, I can work my math backwards, just like medicine. If someone said, "Hey, Martin, I got a drug for cancer. I want to pay $1 trillion," I said, even if you could fix all of cancer, period, I'm not sure it's worth $1 trillion. Maybe, anyway, my point, I guess, is you can work your way backwards mathematically. Cancer might be the only situation where that is true. But if they said 100 trillion, I would say, not even all of cancer is worth 100 trillion. So the same thing with quantum. I have to look at, all right, how much will the upside be? Well, with RSA, the upside's pretty low. But I can even put in more upside and say that one day this will be a $100 billion industry. Most of these stocks are not worth buying, even with that premise. Even with a $100 billion premise, these stocks aren't worth buying. And I can only realistically point to 1 billion or 2 billion. So in any event, this has been a fun conversation. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
I'm going to take
Thank
a break.
you very much.
Thank you. And we'll get back to Everything in a minute. I'll see you guys soon.